So now, bringing on to our next panel for discussion, I invite Priyadarshini Chatterjee onto the stage. Priyadarshini Chatterjee is a food, culture, and travel writer based in Kolkata. Her work has appeared in a number of national and international publications, including Condé Nast Travelers, India, BBC, Eater, Mint Launch, Scroll, The Open Magazine, The Hindu Business Line, etc. I don't know, only God knows how many more magazines she must have gone through and worked on them. And her work basically focuses on the intersections of food, history, and culture. She is particularly interested in exploring food in the historical context. Thank you. I leave the stage to Priyadarshini.
Thank you, Sankalp. I didn't know what I did to you. We'll find that out. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and I'm sure a lot of you are tempted to doze off a little bit. I know I am. But we'll move forward with, for this session, we will invite on stage 3 writers who had qualified to the shortlist of the ICA Writing Prize. I will reserve the introductions for when they present their papers. But for now, please welcome on stage Harshita Lalwani, Sunaina Dhir, and Rachit Keertiman. We have another very special person who will join us for this session, Charmaine O'Brien. I'll introduce Charmaine to you now. Charmaine is a food writer and historian of global repute with multiple books to her name: Eating the Present, Tasting the Future, Exploring India Through Her Changing Food, Flavors of Delhi, and the Penguin Food Guide to India. She's the author of World Food, New Orleans, and was awarded a Harry A. Bell grant from the International Association of Culinary Professionals in 2001. She was a part of the team that set up Symposium of Australian Gastronomy in Sydney. Welcome, Charmaine. So for this session, we have an eclectic mix of papers, quite diverse in their content, but a common thread that runs through this set is that they tie rice in general and heirloom rice in particular to culture and identity in the Indian context. These papers use rice as a lens to look at life and livelihood of communities and the multifaceted role that rice plays in shaping cultural, regional, and even diasporic identities. Our first presenter today is Harshita Lalwani. Harshita is a freelance marketing professional and a food writer with a background in book publishing. She writes a Substack newsletter chronicling her Sindhi culinary heritage called, I love the name, Sindhi with a Dash of Hindi. Her paper, titled Lost Rice from a Lost Homeland, explores indigenous rice varieties grown in pre-partition Sindh and the role of rice in Sindhi cuisine. And when I say Sindhi cuisine, I mean the cuisine of Sindhis that migrated to India. And of course, because Sindhis still are there in Pakistan. So, and this is interesting because that association between rice, especially rice cultivation, and the Sindhi community is not often highlighted in conversations around food that we have nowadays in popular media in the country. So that makes it interesting. Over to you, Harshita. We'd love to see your presentation and hear you speak. Anshuman will help you with it. Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Harshita and I'm excited to be presenting this paper on Sindhi indigenous rice varieties with you. So before we get to talking about rice cultivation in Sindh, I want to take a moment and talk about the Sindhi identity as it is today. As most of you might be aware, Sindh used to be a part of India up until 1947. After independence, over 2 million Sindhi families, mostly Sindhi Hindus, had to leave Pakistan and head to India with no idea of what awaited them on the other side of the border. In the process, they left behind their homes, their belongings, and a strong sense of regional identity. Now, most Indian identities have a strong state identity that is rooted in the land that they were born and brought up in. Whereas this evidently changed for the Sindhi diaspora in India, because their identity went from being a proud identity that was about the land that they lived in to one that was reduced to that of a migrant or a refugee or a member of a displaced community. In addition to this diluted identity, what also happened was that a lot of cultural erasure took place within the Sindhi culture in the aspects of our literature, our language, our music, and our religion. So that begs the question, has this cultural erasure also affected Sindhi cuisine? What do we think of when we think of Sindhi cuisine today? If you do a quick Google search on the history of Sindhi cuisine, you're going to see the same 10 to 12 articles with the headline of check out these 8 to 10 popular Sindhi dishes to try for Diwali or Holi or New Year's. And they often have what I like to call the favorite 5: Sindhi curry, sai bhaji, koki, dal pakwan, and of course, papad. Now, there's also vague references to the culinary influences that have come and gone and left a mark on Sindhi cuisine, but there's no real effort that is made to extrapolate these influences and to create a timeline of when the cuisine changed and how it is what we know it to be today. And in addition to this, the feature that becomes the key distinguishing feature about Sindhi cuisine is that it is so adaptable. It has to be adaptable because it is a 5,000-year-old cuisine. And in the process, one ingredient that has been overlooked in this cuisine that has been around as long as Sindhi cuisine has been around is rice. So if you look at this next slide over here, this is a screenshot of like 6 Sindhi rice dishes that I could fit comfortably on this page. There are more than this, definitely more than 6, but what all of these dishes have in common is that rice is being treated as more than just served plain and boiled on the side. And these are all from very prominent Sindhi food blogs that I am obviously aware of, being a Sindhi myself. And if there exists this rich history of rice recipes to fall back on that treat rice in different unique ways, then obviously that begs the question that there must be some provenance to rice within Sindh, the land of Sindh. To some of you, this answer may be obvious that yes, of course, rice is grown in Sindh. But to me, as a second-generation Sindhi who has no connection to Sindh anymore, the fact that rice was grown in Sindh was a bit of a shock to me. And I was very excited to find out that, in fact, Sindh has a rich rice growing history. So the earliest records that I could find of rice cultivation in Sindh go as far back as 1926. And despite the fact that Sindh is a predominantly desert, arid, dry landscape, rice was the predominant crop in cultivation in 1926. There were over 1.2 million acres of land under rice cultivation, and there existed 35 indigenous rice varieties. This includes white grain aromatic rice, basmati rice, and red rice. Now, the reality of this is a little bit grim. It seems that only 1 out of these 35 varieties exists to this day, and that variety is the Sukdasi variety. So Sukdasi is called Sukdasi because that is the Sindhi word for flavor. And this rice releases a strong aroma when it's cooked, and it's found in different lengths of grain. The ones that I've covered in my presentation are long grain Sukdasi varieties. The history of Sukdasi rice between 1926 and the Green Revolution in Pakistan is quite unclear, but there are reports of this rice being replaced with a high-yielding hybrid basmati rice in 1983 so that the Pakistani government could combat food scarcity. Then we cut to 30 years down the line, it's 2010 floods in Pakistan, and this rice was almost lost. It was driven to the brink of extinction because of the devastating nature of the floods. And in combination with the devastating nature of the floods, the Pakistani government forced farmers to grow non-indigenous hybrid varieties in order to increase crop productivity, crop output, and to bring the economy back up. So the long and short of it is that Sukdasi rice is no longer commercially grown, even in Sindh, Pakistan. And what is lost in that is this very tangible connection to rice, right? Already, maybe this rice had some connection to the Sindhi community in Pakistan, but the Sindhi community in India is now twice removed from having this very tangible connection to rice. So in order to still establish the role that rice plays in Sindhi cuisine in India, I designed a close-ended survey that was primarily directed to the Sindhi diaspora in order to understand the consumption of rice habits in the Sindhi community and if rice has some cultural value within the Sindhi diaspora. My survey received 217 responses from 13 countries and 46 cities with 156 Sindhi responses. And the results are very clear in the fact that rice consumption is an important part of a normal Sindhi diet, and that we do, in fact, have a very important value attached to rice within our community. Over 70% of Sindhis within my survey consume rice every day or every other day. 67% of them need rice to be present during special occasions like weddings and baby showers, and most importantly, 81% of them associate Sindhi cuisine with frequent rice consumption. Now, this realization is major because the Sindhi community in India is so fragmented that we don't really have a collective understanding of our identity, be it within the culinary space or outside of it. So to understand that, yes, we are rice-loving people is an important realization. I also asked respondents to share inputs on rice dishes that I had not covered in my survey. I had included 8, and they shared 13 more, bringing it up to 21 rice recipes that were unearthed as part of this survey. And I also asked respondents to share proverbs or idioms about rice that they may be aware of in the Sindhi language. And even though only 3.2% of them responded, the proverbs are indicative of the fact that rice is viewed as a heavenly offering in the Sindhi community, and that it is viewed as something that brings the community together. So I wanted to test my hypothesis just a little bit further. So I reached out to a farming charity based in Sindh, Pakistan, called the Basic Development Foundation. And I spoke to their executive director, Mr. Altaf Mahesar, about the Sugdasi rice, because that's a rice variety that's not really heard of on this side of the border. And his inputs basically cemented that Sugdasi rice held great value within the Sindhi community when it was still being cultivated. Sugdasi rice symbolizes prosperity in the Sindhi community, and it was reserved for special occasions because it was quite expensive. And it was a matter of pride and dignity to have Sugdasi rice in your household because of its distinct aroma, again going back to the fact that it is called Sugdasi rice. A dish that was commonly prepared with Sugdasi rice is dag bhat, which is where you cook rice with onions without caramelizing them. I was also able to speak to Dr. Ismail Kumbhar at Sindh Agricultural University in Tandojam, and he informed me that the unique aroma of Sugdasi rice can be described as being nutty or grainy with floral and earthy undertones. So sadly, while I may never be able to smell this rice myself, I am happy to know, I kind of know what it smells like. In the next picture, you can see what Sugdasi rice looks like without the husk and with the husk on, and this is the long grain version. As part of doing this research, I had a very profound realization when I was talking with my grandfather that his father, my great-grandfather, used to be a farmer of the Sugdasi rice. It was the short grain version, not the long grain version, but it was quite nice to kind of come full circle in my culinary quest, so to say. So, to conclude, if we know that Sugdasi rice and rice in general has an important role to play in Sindhi cuisine, what does that mean for Sugdasi rice when we look at the wider Indian culinary preservation efforts? If you look at the map that's in my presentation, which has been provided by the Better India, the rare rice map of India, you're not going to see Sugdasi rice on there. And chances are that you will never see Sugdasi rice on there if we look at geographical borders when looking at culinary preservation efforts. The thing is, the preservation of Sindhi cuisine has often fell upon the members of the community, and it has often been one-sided. And it also means that what is at stake then is the loss of a 5,000-year-old cuisine. So obviously, while my main goal in writing this paper was to understand the value of rice within the Sindhi community, my secondary goal was to challenge terms like Indian culinary preservation efforts, Indian heritage rice, and Indian cuisine to include Sindhi culinary preservation efforts, Sindhi heritage rice, and Sindhi cuisine. Because otherwise what's at stake is that we don't have a wider, diverse view of what's in our country, and the Sindhi community has evidently contributed to a lot of the food that we find in India today. So if you're an academic, scholar, food writer, cookbook author, food consultant working on a culinary mapping project of India, I hope that my presentation inspires you to also look to the Sindhi community and our food. Thank you.
Thank you, Harshita, for the wonderful presentation. So one of the reasons this paper is interesting to me is that it is kind of a departure from the more popular line of discussing the evolution of cuisines and culinary identities, especially in the subcontinent. which is in terms of additions and adoptions, how cuisines have evolved through, assimilation of various influences and ingredients that came through settlers, traders, conquerors, or even colonizers. But this paper is a reminder that cuisines also evolved through omission and erasure, and how a cuisine changes and adapts in the absence of ingredients and conditions that are left behind when people are displaced, whether by force or choice. What I would like to ask you is, of course, you mentioned 35 varieties of rice, but the only one that still exists is the Sugandasi, which is an umbrella term for fragrant rice, right? So what about, what is the kind of information you received about the other varieties, or how do we understand how this cuisine has changed in the absence of those?
So I think that's a fantastic question, and I think through the process of this research, I've had a couple of contacts in Sindh and Pakistan, and we've only been able to understand some things about Sugdasi rice, and that too very little, because none of it has been documented. So my efforts in understanding some of the other varieties have been unfruitful. However, I did learn about one Sindhi red rice variety called Ratria. Ratria is grown in the Indus Delta near where Karachi is, in a region called Thatta. And in ancient times, it was very drought resistant, and in fact, it grew really well in saline water conditions, which is quite obvious given that the Indus Delta opens into the Arabian Sea. So there are farmers who are preserving Ratria rice within the Indus Delta region, but I'm afraid that that's all the knowledge that I was able to find through some of these contacts in Sindh. But that's not to say that I don't intend to find out more. I think I've just kind of unlocked a little culinary mapping quest for myself. So yeah.
Absolutely. So that would have been my next question, because it seems like this paper has a lot of potential to sort of build on. And what are your plans going forward, if you have any?
So I spoke to an organization based in Chennai called Spirit of the Earth, and they basically grow and sell indigenous Indian varieties of rice. And as part of my conversations with them, I asked them, would you be open to stocking Sindhi rice, even though it's possibly technically not a part of India? And the representative was quite interested to be able to stock Sugdasi rice, provided that they're able to understand the logistics of bringing in a seed or a germplasm from a different country. So I think that would also be another point of research. How does that work? Are there any geopolitical forces at play that could maybe affect it or maybe not? Another thing that I kind of want to look into is to document traditional farming habits with those farmers in Sindh who have still held on to this particular rice, because that knowledge is also largely absent and not spoken about, because obviously given that this rice is no longer commercially grown, a lot of the farming in Sindh has become commercial now. So I think it is also important to be able to establish how the rice was grown when it was still being consumed by the general public in Sindh. And another question to point to what you had said previously about how the cuisine has evolved without this rice. I would say that Sindhi cuisine has kind of just adapted to whatever's available to it. I think being Sindhi, you just have to be adaptable. So the rice aspect has not changed, but what I have noticed is that the Sindhi community does not talk about meat-based rice dishes as much as it talks about the vegetarian Sindhi pulaus. And there's a rich history of cooking Sindhi pulaus with mutton and a fish grown in River Indus called pallo, which is like a kind of hilsa fish. So these dishes are not spoken about that much on this side of the border, because, and this is my assumption somewhere, that the Sindhi community felt like they had to adapt to the dominant religion in India. And Sindhis in Sindh before partition, they were quite accepting of all cultures, and they adopted aspects of Islam and Sikhism and Hinduism. So they did not view meat as this, Brahmanical thing to be avoided. Whereas I think that attitude has sadly taken root in the Sindhi community in India today, where these Sindhi-based rice dishes with meat are kind of being looked down upon. So I think that is one way that we've had more vegetable-based Sindhi pulaus coming up.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Harshita. I would like to ask you more questions, but the best come from the audience, as Om said. So I'm going to, we'll take the questions at the end of the session, if that's okay. Thank you so much. Moving on to our next presenter, Sunaina Dhir. Born and raised in New Delhi, Sunaina is a hospitality graduate from the Oberoi Center of Learning and Development in Delhi and has worked at the Oberoi Hotel in Mumbai, and with a collaboration of Ernst & Julio Gallo Wines, India, before moving to Dubai. She has also headed business development for a Dubai-based restaurant company, franchising various food chains to the region. She started blogging about food, travel, and a bit about wine, with qualifications from WSET2 and food writing from Cordon Bleu. When not writing, she loves to cook, read, and travel. Sunaina's paper, titled Spotlight on the Role of Women as Custodians of Cultivation, Harvest, Revival, and Cultural Identity of the Heirloom Varieties of Rice in India. This ties into some of the conversations we have had this morning with regards to seed conservation and the role of women in agriculture. I think Mr. Vijay pointed out that there are more women farmers, so that's going to be an interesting conversation. And this paper explores the role of women in seed conservation in particular, but agriculture in general. And in the process, I think it also scrutinizes the gender roles and female identity. So over to you, Sunaina.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here. My paper was on women and heritage varieties of rice. The reason I chose this paper was because I wanted a different dimension to rice. And I found that women have been through centuries connected with this grain in every aspect, in terms of rituals, customs, seed conservation. As mothers, I think even recipes and everything at home is connected with the woman, which is the mother. I found this very interesting poem, which is in the Tamil literature. My region is Tamil Nadu. So I found this poem very interesting, and it is talking about women who weed in the farms. It's very pretty. Though women with glass bangles come to work at weeding, the dazzle of the glass leaves the job of the glass far behind. Bracelets with silver ends, pretty on the women's arms, women, thus boasting, remove well the paddy weeds. What here it means is that the work of the weeding is actually done by the women farmers. It was always done by the women farmers, and it is a back-breaking job. And they have endless hours on the field just weeding. So the person over here in the poem is cautioning women that just pull out the weeds, and the supervisor is telling them that your glass bangles and your silver bangles will hinder this process of weeding. But just you have to pull out the weeds. That's your work. So it's a very beautiful poem talking about women and through the centuries what they have been doing. This paper talks a lot about the women and their evolution and throughout centuries, but I just want to talk about two women which really inspired me through the paper. One was Dr. Sheila Balaji. She is from the Spirit of the Earth, and she started this farm in Manjakudi in Tamil Nadu, and she was going through this some of the farms over there. She was just walking past, and she found a lot of pesticides being used. And what struck her was that these pesticides must also be detrimental to the health of the people who are farming. So she went back to her NGO and she said, I want to now sow rice but without pesticides. So she found out these heritage varieties of rice and she started her farm, and now they have 289 varieties which they grow on this farm. And I think even Harshita spoke to Spirit of the Earth. They have been so good and in dealing with this paper also, and they are very passionate about what they do. What I really liked about Dr. Balaji was that she made it her mission not only to grow these rice varieties, but she also organized seed festival, which is so amazing. I mean, you get 500 farmers across the Tamil Nadu, and she made them exchange seeds, and that's how she got her first seeds from. She just got her seeds from this festival. So I really find it very inspiring that a woman just goes out and she sees that, she needs to grow healthy food, and she does this for that region. This is what one very famous chef, Ranveer Brar, as we all know him, he has said about her. And so inspiring. In times when there's talk about sustainability and endangered food species, there are people who are actually walking the talk and making a difference. So we can have a lot of talk about, indigenous rice varieties. People can talk about all the knowledge which we have gained from it, but actually she's really walking the talk. She has helped preserve 30 indigenous rice varieties, and each one of them is a gem, and that you have to eat to believe. The store which they have right now, they stock many varieties of rice, but the real problem they have is basically in educating customers. That's what they told me. That once their customers walk into their store, it takes them at least 5 times for them to walk back and actually pick up that bag of rice, because they really don't know why rice should be red or black or small grained. It's a real feat for them. This is the other lady whom I really was inspired by. I don't know if many of you know her. She's Menika. She owns a store called Manvasanai in Chennai. And she also stocks a lot of indigenous rice varieties. Her story is a bit different. Her husband, his name was Tilak, and he wanted to give her very good food because she was pregnant. So he wanted her to have very healthy food. And he was inspired by Namalvar, who was a great agricultural scientist, who said our seeds are our biggest weapons. But sadly, Tilak passed away. But she continued his legacy. And now she handles the store, and she helps revive all these rice varieties. And amazingly, she has cooked 100 rice variety dishes in one day. And she's in some world record book. And she continues her work by spreading the knowledge of rice to all the people in Tamil Nadu. So she was very, very inspiring to me. She encourages even women, homemakers. She just goes down, she does YouTube videos. She has lots of recipes. She answers all the questions which she can, in fact, she was on me with WhatsApp also. The moment I WhatsApp her, she replied back. One of the very rare things now. She's even created an ice cream with rice varieties. So it's really amazing. I was really inspired by her. And I wanted to dedicate this paper to such women who are so inspiring. And these are probably only, there are 2. There must be hundreds like these in our country who are doing such fabulous work but need the spotlight on. After this, there is a short video which I would like you to see, which I curated. And I had interviewed some women farmers from Manjakudi, and the interview you'll see on the video. Enough to go to the farm, and she related the questions which I had for the women farmers.
Excerpt from an interview conducted in Manjakudi. What are the various activities you do on the farm? We women are involved in the following operations in the farm: seed sowing, transplanting, weeding, biopesticides and compost preparation, roguing of types, harvesting, threshing, drying and seed storage. What are you cultivating now, and what were you consuming before these varieties were reintroduced into your farms? Currently we are cultivating heirloom varieties like Kichli Samba and Mapalai Samba, which we are also consuming as rice at home. Before these varieties, we used to eat modern varieties, that's white pony, CR1009, that's idli rice. Do you have time to do home chores also after working on the farm? Yes, we are involved in both household work, taking care of fish animals, and other agriculture-related work on the farm. What are the challenges you face in farming? We face a few challenges. like the availability of labor, climate change, pest and disease, scarcity of harvest machines, and marketing of harvested paddy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunaina, for the wonderful presentation. I think we'll move on to the next paper because time is of essence, and when we'll take up the discussion at the end. Our next presenter is Rachit. Rachit is a chef and culinary consultant and someone who, in his own words, who documents everything culinary that he comes across. He has been making people aware about real Odisha's food through pop-ups, creative collaborations with individuals and organizations, and through his posts on social media. Rachit's paper is titled Beyond Staple, Unraveling Rice Heritage of Odisha. The paper uses rice as a lens to explore Odisha's diversity in terms of cultures and communities, with a focus on the region's indigenous communities and how rice, particularly heirloom rice, has played an important role in shaping these diverse identities.
Good afternoon, everyone. So my first question would be, how many of you know where Odisha is on the map? Oh, there are a few people who don't know. Brilliant. I want that. Okay, so now, what do you think Odisha food is about? I mean, let's make it interactive. I know I don't want it to be a monologue. So I would want to know if you know any Odia dishes. And if you are from Odisha, then don't answer. I know Om is. He isn't here, so he would have answered. So any idea? Sorry. Yes. Okay, he said one, which is a very summer staple: rice and water.
Ambula.
Okay, she said one ingredient. Very good. Can I have another 7 more? Probably make it 10 things that you know. 1 second. No, that's not. Sorry? Yeah, dahi bara and aludam. It's a very street food. Anybody else? So I've got now 4 things. Dalma, that is 5. That's already been told. Sorry? Chenna podo. Chana is in Bengal. Okay. Anyway, so 6. I've got 6. 4 more things. Anybody knows about Odisha? It's debatable. It's okay. Yeah, we don't want trouble in paradise.
We don't want.
Sorry? Ghanto, okay. Brilliant. So we've got another 2 more. Anybody? Different kinds of pitha, okay.
Ghar ya ghanta.
No, wo bol diya.
No.
Anything else?
Okay.
Yeah, it's been told. So anyway, the thing is, that's the beauty of Odisha, right? It's like always been that, okay, what is there? And even if you read the old gazettes that the first British surveyors, when they came to Odisha, have written, they have written about the hill tracts and the tribal and the indigenous community who stay there in a very, I mean, they obviously would be scared. Like imagine like a, British officer coming down all the way from, London after doing his course to Orissa, and is posted in a place where it takes 7 days to reach there, and suddenly you see the tribes, and obviously they're going to attack you, right? So it's always been like that about Odisha, but I'll tell you it isn't. You're most welcome to come to the state. It isn't like that. So for this paper, I really wanted to pick on the topic of why and how rice as a grain in Orissa is much beyond food. Like, everybody talks about Odia food, the temple food, the indigenous food. I've done my bit, I've done pop-ups for that, but when this thing came up, I said, let me figure out and write a paper where I don't talk about food at all. So my paper has no recipes, anything close to what a chef would write for a paper on rice. And with this, what happened is I've started, contacting people who have been working around rice in various positions in various departments for a very long time. In fact, the oldest rice research institute is in Cuttack. It's the city where I stay in. It was set up in 1946. And 1952 is when it was fully active. It's called Central Rice Research Institute. So those guys have done that's that many years of data that they have. So when I approached them and I said, I want to work on this paper. So some of the information that they gave was absolutely brilliant. So I'll quickly take you through what I have written about in the paper. So this is the basic outline of what my paper speaks about. It shows how rice is deep-rooted in culture in Orissa, and not only in the coastal part of Orissa, but also in the indigenous communities that stay on the Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand border, all of them. It also explores the relationship between rice and Orissa in terms of how it has been very important for maritime trade that we used to do with Colombo up till Java, Bali and Sumatra in olden days. And it also talks about how and why rice is important from birth to funeral in Orissa. It's celebrated in birth. Like the first food that is given is Anna Prasanna that you say, is kheer that is made. That's the first solid food, like kind of semi-solid food that is given to a kid. And even when there's a funeral that happens, the person who's going to light the funeral pyre, he goes in front with with a gamcha, which is like a local cloth that we use, with a lot of puffed paddy, which signifies a restart, basically. Puffed rice, everybody knows. So puffed paddy is something. We also displayed some outside. So that's what we, the person takes in front and, he keeps throwing a little bit of that while they go. So these are the regions that have basically explored in the paper. So coastal belt is something that obviously when you Google about Odisha food or anything, that's what is going to come up. Because that's, they have been dominating, like coastal Odisha has been kind of dominating in terms of a lot of things. But I have, explored the coastal belt, but most interestingly is the Eastern Ghats. So just like your Western Ghats, the Eastern Ghats, the highest point of Eastern Ghats lies in the state of Odisha in a district called Koraput. In that elevation, they grow rice, and the fields there are step fields, terrace fields. That's how they grow. They have natural source of water. Till now, there are a lot of places where there's no irrigation that happens. But it's pretty interesting. We'll see further down the presentation when they're not growing rice in the same field, since it's not like a lowland rice field where there's a pump house. There's no pump house here. It just comes from a natural stream. So water flows throughout the year there. So when they're not growing rice, what do they do? So I'll show you. That's pretty interesting. The Simlipal biosphere, which is in Mayurbhanj district, closer to Bengal. So Simlipal biosphere used to grow a lot of varieties of rice before it became a biosphere and was cut off for any form of farming. A lot of the tribes and the communities stay inside, and they still speak about like how they used to grow a lot of this rice in that region. Then we have also explored a lot of the tribes, which is pretty interesting because in Orissa has the highest number of PVTGs. So PVTGs are particularly vulnerable tribal groups, and we have 62 of them that there are in total, and Orissa has the highest concentration of them. And I'm talking about tribes like the Gadaba tribe, we'll see further down. The study says that they came during the first migration that happened, like when it was one land mass and it wasn't, different continents. And so there's a very similarity between the way they dress up and the tribes from Masai Mara dress up. It's very uncanny that you'll find them here. But they also have been growing rice. All right, so here on the left is what is this red rice variety that is grown in Mayurbhanj district. It's also there on display. It's a parboiled variety, and it's a single boil. So when I was way before working on this paper, I still work in that region to source a lot of ingredients for chefs in Bombay and Delhi. I knew that I consume parboiled varieties also, but they have a single and a double parboiled. So that is pretty interesting because, in local parlance, they call it ek sija. Sija means boil. So they say ek sija ya do sija. So I'm like, what is this? Like, I just know that this is parboiled. So they're like, no, there's a variety which is just one, when the water comes to boil, once and we shut it off, and then it's dehusked. And then there's one where we do it twice. And it's just very interesting that the same rice variety, when done in this process, tastes completely different, looks completely different. That's something pretty interesting. You will be surprised that Orissa still has a barter system till date in the huts. If you go to huts in any of the places in Mayurbhanj, in Koraput, Ganjam, these are like some districts, there's still barter system that happens. They have been like cashless before cashless was cool, probably, That's a photo from one of the temples in Orissa where the food is a big part of it, and rice is something that is cooked there. They cook the rice by absorption method. A lot of people do the straining method, but they cook it by absorption method. And it's common practice that if there is rice that you have got from the temple, you eat it. If there is some that remains, we sun dry it and we store it at home, and it's called nirmalya. So it's a belief that when a person is on his deathbed or whatever, that's the last morsel of food that they should be given. So everybody keeps it at home. It's something that it could be anything, but it's so important that has to be the rice. That's the last thing that if a person is just about to die, that's the last thing that they should have. So I was telling you what happens when there is no rice that's growing in Koraput. So they distill mahua there. Mahua, you're familiar with mahua, right? It's a very interesting liquor. Sankalp is, he's tasted some, I had got, but he's kept it. Anyway, so what happens with mahua is it's a thing that is distilled in MP, in Chhattisgarh, in Bengal, in Orissa, a lot of places. In Orissa, I've seen the standard style of distillation, which is like, they do it in the backyard, they ferment the fruit and all of that. But here in the hill tracts of Orissa, which in Koraput, which is the highest point in Orissa, we saw something very interesting. So this is the rice field, and the water you can see is what flows throughout the year, and they're setting up the pot. And that's how they distill mahua. And it is pretty interesting because the farmers, when there's off season, they're not, it's not planting season, they put the traditional, their unit in that field, and there's flowing water, which is very important for distillation. And they use the mud that comes out from that field to pack it up, and they distill liquor like that. I was talking about the barter system in Orissa. It's pretty interesting that not only they barter the grains which are dehusked, but also paddy. Ma'am was talking about like two ladies from Tamil Nadu who are doing fantastic job. So I have written in the paper, I met this lady called Jamuna, who is from one of the regions which borders Andhra Pradesh. She by herself started a seed bank. Probably, this is what the research institute told me. She started it way back in the 80s, but it's like around 2002-3 they got to know that there's somebody who's doing it, and she's got a huge collection. And she organizes very interesting Chassa Sabha, that's what they call it in local parlance. It's like people from about 70-80 villages from a 80-100 kilometer radius come down just to exchange paddy. She has some, she just gives them, then asks them, what do you have? They say this is a long grain, whatever, and they just exchange it. Not only that, she has in knowledge which has been passed down to her from her mother and her father about very interesting fertilizers, natural fertilizers, that she also makes and gives the recipe to these ladies. And when we had visited her, the paddy bank, we saw that, some of the paddy was kept covered in mud. So, that's the way to preserve it, is what she said. And there were some which did not activate when they were planted, but apparently using some neem water and something that she knew, they kind of activated it. So, barter system is something that is very prevalent, and it's paddy that is mainly used there. So this is a heart. You can see this lady, that's a measure. She just gave the paddy, and this guy is packing tuna to use in the pan. So he just packs it, gives it, and that's it, done. The transaction is over quicker than a UPI probably. No scanning and nothing, none of that happening there. So during writing the paper, the observations, the three things that I wanted to critically touch point was identity. Being from Orissa, I've been asked a lot, ki, like, kya tum log, why do you keep eating rice? You know, so you just keep eating rice. I said no. The thing about rice is that we eat in Orissa, it becomes the base for all the Odia dishes that we have, and that's very important because if you're having say a dal with a methi paratha, you know, and compare it to a dal with just a plain paratha, there's a difference, right? So if you're making like a yellow dal and you're having it with the methi paratha, it'll taste like methi dal. So that's the thing about rice in Orissa, that we try to keep it as a foundation for all the different dishes that Orissa cooks, and they are a plethora of dishes that is cooked in Orissa with variety of textures. It goes everything, like, so a lot of people think that there's a lot of mutton and fish that we do eat, but the amount of vegetable that Orissa cuisine actually has is insane, and it is very seasonal. It's something that is not spoken about much outside the state, but rice becomes the foundation of that. There are particular rice which are had with mutton. There's a particular rice that's had with vegetable during winters, during summers. So it's a lot of thing that goes on, and the rice becomes the most important thing in the whole recipe and cuisine. Cultural significance, I told you festivals centered around rice are, so there's a saying in Orissa that we say, Bara Masa Tero Porbo. In 12 months, Orissa celebrates 13 festivals. There's a festival every month, more than a festival. Most of them are centered around rice in some form. So Makar Sankranti, when it happens, so we have this prasad called Makar Chawla, which is just new rice, like just, you know, harvested. And that's probably the only time we have rice in its raw form. It's just crushed. There's some jaggery, banana, some chena, some coconut that is added. It's mashed and you just have that. That's it. Like, you know, remainder of the year, if you end up having raw rice, you get a scolding, what's wrong with you. But that's the only time that, you know, you have raw rice. So it's pretty interesting like that. So this is the oldest tribe I was talking about that stays in Orissa. They're one of the oldest tribes in the world. And what you see is all the tools that they still use. Because the place that these tribes stay in, it's very difficult to reach there even now. They have been kept cut off for a reason. There's government officials who go, and if you have to go, you take a permission from the collector and they send a vehicle with you. But it was very interesting to see that no matter what world we are living in and there's so much of machinery happening, they still use all of that you see in this picture. That's the plow, which is very traditional. That's what they use to grind rice till now. So they don't let anything go to waste. So the broken grains are ground into powder. And on the extreme right is what you see is the pounder. Like that's what they use to take the husk out after they've processed the rice. So yeah, I mean, question answers later, and yeah, that's my paper. Thank you so much.
It's interesting how the paper uses rice to sort of, train the spotlight on nuances of life and food ways that are usually overlooked in dominant conversations around food, how food is perceived, who eats what. Usually it's seen from a place of privilege and access and all of that. And I think this paper sort of does a great job in using rice to turn the conversations towards communities and cultures and life and food ways that are not a part of mainstream conversation often. Thank you. But this is a writing prize, and the craft of writing is central to this. Of course, we're interested in the subject and all that we have researched and worked on. But now we'd like to also talk about the craft of writing, again, which is central to this prize. And for that, I'd like to invite Charmaine to join this discussion.
Thank you so much. Thanks for all the work that you've done. It's been really great to read the papers. So I suppose Priyadarshini and I have actually read the papers. So I thought I'm not an expert on rice. So I didn't grow up with rice. So I didn't want to. I thought my expertise could be better used by making some comments about writing, because that's actually what this is about. It's about a food writing prize. So I had so many things I wanted to say from the previous sessions as well, but I won't do that. So the way I want to tie that is what was talked about, and what you want to do in your work is communicate. Now, in terms of writing, what I'm going to say is, it's up to you how you want to write, right? Whatever I say, it's your choice. So if you want to do academic writing, then that's fine. You do academic writing, that's your thing. But if you want to communicate with a broader audience, you need to tell a story. And you can do that. You don't have to dumb your work down. You can do the research, you can do the thorough work that you do, but then you lift it up to another level by telling a story and by crafting the writing. So being a writer is usually something that you do from internal motivation, because believe me, you don't do it for the money. And it can be like, I write books, and so just from it can take years to write a book. Long form writing doesn't have to be a book. That's, I suppose, the ultimate. But it takes time. But I believe there is an audience for writing. Books haven't gone away. Go to Fakir Chand bookshop in Delhi and see the piles of books in there. Maybe bookshops are not as around as much, but people are buying books online. So don't be disheartened. There is a market for writing, but you're also competing against all the new forms of presenting information, videos, etc. But there is also forums for longer form writing on those same mediums. So I won't go into a lecture about writing, but if you want to, because I'm going to talk again after the next panel, so I'll just make a few comments here and then I'll do part two. You can do your work and then lift it up into writing. And if you want, so I suppose it's about, what do you want to do? Do you want, I write about food, but I consider myself a writer, and I work really hard at writing. And one of the things, and particularly I heard Harshita and all of you tell a story when you got up and spoke. And so one of the things that you can do to get your own voice, and I do it, and people, I say my work out loud, like I talk my work to myself, and you hear the rhythm in it, because you want to engage people. And that is how you can communicate well and potentially take people into your communities, into your stories, and encourage people to want to know what you're talking about, to want to go deeper, to want to understand that it's an opportunity for a door into other communities. So I'm just going to stop there. I'm mindful of time, and I will do part two about writing. And just one more thing I'll say is, think about how you feel after you've delved into, like, you've read something and it's really engaged you, and how wonderful your brain feels, as opposed to after you've watched a TikTok video. I'm sure for me, my brain feels much better after the reading bit.
Thank you so much, Charmaine. We have little time, but we will take a few questions from the audience.
Hi, I'm Sanjukta. It's just it's not a question really. I was very excited and for Harshita's paper, and in fact I've been going to Kutch for some time, and there's a very special dish which the Kutchis make. They call the Kutchi biryani. They call it the khawa, and it has come from Sindh. It's made with mutton, of course, but the only information I could find about it was on an article, like a small paragraph on Business Today, written in 2016. And it only mentions the difference between when it was in Sindh and when it changed, like transformed. That the Sindhis put a lot of tomatoes in it, and they stopped putting tomatoes when it came here. So I just wanted to share that because I was so excited to hear your paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you for adding to our, knowledge here. Thank you. Yes.
It was really, really amazing, like really beautiful, each one of your presentations, so well crafted. And so I actually thought of the whole Sindhi thing, and I think I can help you get the seeds from Pakistan to India, because I was just thinking that how it's possible, and I'm going to tell you a way. So let's work on that. Yeah.
We have something concrete coming out of this.
Yes. But no one's going to know how it's going to come.
What happens in this room
Stays in this room.
And YouTube.
No YouTube, trust me. No. This information will not go anywhere. But yeah, we're going to get those seeds here. I had a question for Charmaine, and I also had a question for, Rachit. So, Rachit, how do you see the art of Patachitra come out, like weave into the whole rice traditions? Like, do you think Patachitra is the stories come out in that art form? And like also, do you think because the whole PDS system is giving the rice and the wheat, etc., has that percolated to the tribe? I forget the name of the tribe. Bondas,
the
Bondas,
yeah.
Because it's affected
very interesting that you asked.
Very big tribal
Right.
part of India.
Right.
And sorry, Charmaine, I would like to know that how does one make like farmer stories which can be extremely academic, like very interesting for the audience? Like you are talking about a story, but there's an element of research. So do we talk about our experiences on the ground while working with farmers, or do we pick up the local folklore and sort of present that as a story format?
I was going to talk about that in part 2, but you can do those things. And what I was going to say is I'm going to pick up on the people commenting and saying agriculture is boring. That's not true, and it doesn't have to be that. But I'll answer that in the next section.
Yeah. So Patchitra, right? Now that form of art was and is something which is very temple. It's not even a folk art, mind you. Okay. So you won't find any of the daily activities drawn into these art forms. It's always something mythological, something related to the temple. That's about it. So Patchitra doesn't have any reference. In fact, in my paper, I've written in depth about how rice is found in different art forms in Orissa. Where you'll find this is, there is another tribe called the Lanjia Sora. They stay in this district of Rayagada. That style of painting is called Idital, which just got a GI tag. Okay. Now they paint this, and it's, mind you, it's pretty old. It's way older than the Worli art form, but it looks similar. Like the figures look similar. So a lot of people who come to Orissa, they see this and they say, "Oh, is this Worli art?" So you have to explain the whole thing. Now that art form is very tribal, and they draw this whole thing in their hut in one of the walls, which has the whole cultivation and harvest process drawn into it. And so since they follow animism, they don't follow any form of idol worship. That's what they consider their god. So it'll be the whole harvest cycle drawn into it, hunting, everything is drawn into it. That's the only art form that has. But in Konark and in other temples in Bhubaneswar, there are a lot of temple carvings which are rice farming related, and some of them are rice farming. Now your second question was about the PDS and all of that. So when I was in Malkangiri, which is where the Bonda tribes comes from, the oldest tribe, I did in fact ask this question. So so they get rice, and they're not exactly rice eaters. They have been eating ragi for a very long time. They use rice only when there's a wedding to make the mutton curry and all. So that district actually ran a pilot project which has been successful, and now it's implemented, where they stopped giving them rice. They instead started giving them ragi, ground into a powder, because they realized when they were giving them rice that the tribal people, they used to come to the weekly hut, exchange that for ragi and go. They never used to say to the authorities, "We don't want this." They were like, "Okay, fine." They take it, wait for Wednesday, which is the hard day. They'll come down the hills, exchange it and take ragi and go. So now that is something that's being implemented in different districts also. They're taking note of that. They're giving villages mills to grind the ragi and all. So that's happening.
Thank you so much, Rachit. We'll have to, end this session here. Om is already giving me those stares. So, yeah, he is. Yeah, so we'll have to wrap this up now. Thank you so much for joining us. Most of you stayed awake, except one gentleman over there. But I'm glad that we've had such a lovely session. Thank you so much to all of you.